passcode today. I'm not sure what happened, as 2 emails went out. The second one had the passcode on, but originally we didn't think the passcode was needed, but it seems to have been necessary for some people, but not for others. But thanks everyone for joining us and for making it in. My name's Coral. I'm the Marine Education Officer for Devon Wildlife Trust, and I work at Wembury Marine Centre. I'm also a member of Wembury Environment Group and on Wembury Parish Council. Welcome to this evening's talk. This is the second in our series of winter talks, which the Environment Group and the Marine Centre are sort of jointly organising and co-hosting. We're really excited to hear Paul talk this evening. Just before I introduce him, there's just a couple of things to go over. Hopefully, if you could turn your microphones off, everyone's microphone should be off anyway, but if you could please turn your camera off as well, just so it gives Paul the best chance of connections. He's got a few videos that he'd like to show, and keeping the videos on can slow it down a little bit. So if you could turn your cameras off, that would be brilliant. And microphones as well, that's all sorted. We're going to be recording this evening's talk, so we'll send it out to you afterwards if there's anyone else you wanted to show it to, and to people who couldn't make this evening because it was fully booked. So the recording will be available afterwards. As I mentioned, we'll do questions at the end. So Paul's going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll take questions at the end. So if it looks like if the only option is to message myself, please do that, and I'll read them all out to Paul at the end, and we'll do a Q&A. I think that's about it for housekeeping. So yeah, Paul's very kindly offered to give us a talk this evening, and I think the fact that he's sold out just shows how exciting and what a brilliant speaker Paul is. We're certainly in for a treat. So Paul, I will hand over to you, and thanks again for coming along.
Okay, thanks very much, Coral, and thank you everyone for joining the meeting, yeah, as I say, Coral, for inviting me and sorting everything out, and you'll please excuse, I'm a bit rusty on this on these sort of virtual talks. It'd be lovely to do a talk at the village hall, that's in real life at some point, but this will do for now. So the topic, life in Wembury Bay. Wow, well, a really big topic for such a wonderful place, and so many to move, you know, so many aspects to Wembury Bay and the life here, and the moods, and of course so many amazing animals make their homes here, and these are just some of them. These are all Wembury photos, colourful starfish, jellyfish, impressive lobsters, sort of specialities like the St Piran's hermit crab and giant goby, and of course different sorts of anemones, sea anemones, and the black-faced blenny there, the male with the female. But one thing all these pictures have in common is that these animals, is that I'm not going to be talking about any of them, because I wondered sort of how to do this talk, and what I thought is I'd talk about some familiar animals, do a sort of bit of a tour around the bay, and pick out about 8 characters as I think of a lot of the animals, and ones that are easy to see, but also because I think I get the impression that a lot of people who are joining tonight are sort of quite familiar with our marine life, quite knowledgeable and know about it. So I've picked, tried to pick 8 animals that I've found out things about in the last couple of years, really, that have intrigued me, or they've asked questions or mystified me in some way, and or taught me something. So so that's how I did it. And they're all animals that you could see snorkeling easily when the conditions are beautiful like this, beautiful and calm. But some of them as well, you don't even need to get wet. You could see on the beach when the conditions aren't quite so good, like this. This shot obviously taken at low tide. So, without further ado, first one is the shore crab. Really familiar animal to everyone on the shore, and it's got a special place in my affections because it was a shore crab, and watching them sort of going around and doing their things that made me fall in love with marine life, you know, when I was a teenager. So they what got me into all this, and amazing creatures. And of course, but often at Wembury, they're very hidden. I think it's their way, and you only see them when you lift rocks up and so on. And of course, one of the aspects of their lives is they have to shed their armour now and again to grow, and you find what looks like, you know, a pair of crabs like this. And of course, one of them is actually the old armour suit that a crab's just climbed out of. And an average shore crab has to molt about 18 times in its life, total to you know, grow, because the armour doesn't stretch. But so they stay hidden a lot of the time. But of course, in between molts, when they've got a hard suit of armour, you see them out doing their thing, sometimes out on the sand, fighting, looking for a mate, looking for prey, and you can occasionally see two really big males fighting like that, and so on. So they do the thing. But what I hadn't appreciated till went on a rock pool ramble at Blitz about a year ago at night, a night rock pool, and you find that night is the time for shore crabs, is when they come out. And because of course one of their big predators is from the air attack. And I don't know if you've seen crows and gulls sometimes pick up surprisingly large crabs and tackle them. So that's what they've got to fear. That obviously doesn't happen at night. But also at night, the limpets are up and grazing, and when it's damp and cool. So the crabs have an opportunity to get the limpets off the rocks. And the number of crabs we saw on this night rock pool ambling over the rocks with their feast of a limpet that they've managed to chisel off the rock because of this was amazing. And I think also, of course, limpets have eyes as well. They possibly in the day would see a crab coming if they were underwater and grazing, but at night the crab has the advantage and gets the limpet off the rock. So that was that aspect. And here's another one in a pool. So there are all these limpets, say, walking around with their feasts. Okay, next animal is a sea snail. And when I took this picture, it wasn't actually of the sea snails at all. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving around. Johnny, can you see that? Yeah. Fine. So that is a big patch of seaweed, actually a fish nest, and I'll come on to the animal who built that nest later. But what I noticed in this photograph was just the number of sea snails. You can see, I think, 4 different species of top shells. You can see limpets, you can see periwinkles, and so on. So we have a tremendous variety of sea snails at Wembury, and they're well, almost all, they're grazers. They graze on the algae and on microorganisms on the rock surface. But of course, there's always one that's got to be different, and it's the dog whelk. And there's one down here you can see, and that is, of course, a carnivore, the driller killer of the shore. And their prey is often, come on to the Wembury version in a minute, but their prey is often barnacles and mussels. That's what the literature says is a dog whelk's favourite food. And they have special equipment for drilling. With barnacles, they drill through the little plates that make up sort of the sunroof at the top of barnacles to get the insides. And on mussels, they drill these neat, exquisitely little round holes in the mussels, and they pump in digestive enzymes mixed with a narcotic into an animal like a mussel through that hole, turn the inside into soup and suck it out. But so that's sort of what the literature tells you. But our Wembury dog whelks are really into drilling limpets, and here are all Wembury dog whelks doing their thing on limpets. The drilling process on a big limpet will take many hours, even a couple of days to get through. And we see the evidence of this when on the shoreline. You go along, just the other day noticing, on the shoreline where there are empty limpet shells, you pick up enough and very quickly you find them with these very distinctive little holes drilled by the dog whelks. And I really like this one. This one's got a lot of holes started by dog whelks that never made it through. Finally, it did succumb. And what happened there almost certainly was that the limpet was able to shake off the dog whelks drilling all these other times, the ultimate survivor, until it finally got. And this is just an example of dog whelks aren't fussy. This is a dog whelk actually drilled by a dog whelk. It managed to get away as well. So they're not averse to a bit of cannibalism. But what intrigues me about Wembury is that a couple of years ago, I did a talk on Arran, on the Isle of Arran, and gave spiel about limpets and finding the shells and drilling. And a couple of days later, a couple came up to me, saw me on the beach, and said, ever since your talk, we've been walking on, every time we've been on the beach, we've been looking at all the limpet shells, and we haven't found a single drilled one. And sure enough, when I had a look, didn't find one. So what is it about, are there different conditions that make dog whelks prey on different animals? And this is another Wembury example of one on a periwinkle, and it's actually drilling as the periwinkle's crawling along. And can you see it actually started earlier as well? And it's now finding another spot to try and drill. But what's so intriguing about dog whelks is that you get local evolution of a race, if you like, and because they lay these eggs, very distinctive little white capsules of eggs, and they seem to do this all year. Just yesterday, found some dog whelk eggs on the beach, and instead of hatching into planktonic larvae that go off and drift with the plankton, like a lot of sea snails do, they hatch into miniature dog whelks that crawl out of the cases and crawl out over the rocks. And the other thing about dog whelks is that they, if they like the food, if there's plentiful food, the adults just won't move. So because they breed locally like that and don't move, you get this sort of local evolution happening. And it's well known that, for example, they evolve different shell shapes locally, so that dog whelks in a sheltered place where there's a lot of crab predation evolve a small shell opening that makes it more difficult for crabs to open. Dog whelks on a wave-swept coast where they get bashed about by the waves a lot, but there aren't so many crabs, evolve a bigger shell opening that gives them a stronger foothold on the rock. So it's just intriguing to think what sort of selection is happening and producing these avid limpet drillers at Wembury. Talking of crab predation, this is another character, velvet swimming crabs. They like feasting on mollusks, and here they are, one eating a cockle, one here eating a top shell, and they have a very sort of cunning way of dealing with a top shell. They gradually chip away at the opening. They'll take many hours to do that until they finally get through. And it doesn't matter if it isn't the snail still inside the shell. This one's chipping away at a top shell, and can you see there's a little hermit crab inside? So they're quite keen to feed on the hermit crabs as well. But what interesting about the velvet swimming crabs is apparently the literature, and I've been asked this when I've done talks at Plymouth University. People say, aren't velvet swimming crabs vegetarian? They just eat seaweed. Well, it certainly seems not to be the case. Again, does it vary from place to place? Some populations certainly do eat seaweed, but as you can see as well from this slide, they like snails, and they also like any crabs they can get hold of, whether it's the soft claw of a newly molted edible crab, small newly molted shore crabs, or baby crabs, including a small velvet swimming crab. They're also into cannibalism. So whatever, velvet swimming crabs certainly aren't vegetarian. Okay, the next character is sea scorpion, and hopefully this shows also the sort of the food chain. We have perhaps a limpet drilled by a dog whelk, eaten by a crab, and albeit a young crab taken then by a sea scorpion. These wonderful fish that this one's a very small one, and I think they're probably a lot more abundant than we think because they're so cryptic. They can camouflage, and when they ambush their prey, they have you can see one there resting on the seabed and just waiting for its prey. And then they have this wonderful large telescopic mouth that they can use to engulf amazing size prey. A small fish or a prawn nearly as long as they are can be engulfed. And they're also very territorial. They like the spot. These two photographs you can see, looks like the same fish, and it is the same fish because the patterns, you can see those photographs taken nearly a year apart. So he obviously likes the spot to wait for prey. And these are I said about sea scorpions being cryptic. These are all this species of sea scorpions. Quite a few of these are Wembury shots, not all of them, but show the different colours they can go to blend in with. Orange sponges, pink seaweed, kelp, and so on. Fine, good camouflage. Oh, this was a very odd sighting this year, this summer, was this sea scorpion. You can see what the eyes are normally like. This one had these amazing, whatever they were, covers on its eyes. Looked like a pair of sunglasses, but they're blue and it looked almost opaque. I don't know whether it was a disease, a parasite. The other strange thing about this individual, so this was on a Wembury reef, was that not only the eyes were strange, but there was this odd scar, very wound underneath the eye. Looks as though possibly it could have been a crab claw, whether this sea scorpion tackled a crab that was bigger than it could cope with. But if that injury led to the eye, why did it also affect the other eye? The other eye had that strange blue covering as well. So I don't know, I'd be interested if anyone's seen anything like that before. But also going back to the food chain, sea scorpions are prey for other animals. And this is from a Wembury reef. I hope this video might be quite jerky. I've only put a very few videos in. But this is what happens when a cuttlefish on top of a Wembury reef spots a small sea scorpion in the seaweed. And that was the end of the sea scorpion. And I thought, did it really catch it? And zoomed in, and there, sure enough, is the stripy tail of the sea scorpion. So just a point, you've got, you know, a really long food chain there. If you've got, you know, some type of sea snail, killed by a dog whelk, eaten by a crab, eaten by a young one, eaten by a sea scorpion taken by a cuttlefish eaten by a seal. You know, you've got marine food chains are amazingly long and very complex food webs. Okay, that pink seaweed you saw with the cuttlefish there is you know, hunting ground for him, but it's a building material for this guy. I like to think of this as the colourful craftsman of the bay. This is a corkwing wrasse, a male, and it really is common. If you were to snorkel from sort of around any of the rocks in Wembury Bay in the summer, possibly the first fish you'd see is one of these beauties. And he, as I say, builds a nest. And here, hopefully this video will play. This is one of these Wembury males building his nest. And this is a big nest. This is all his construction. And he doesn't, a lot of the pioneering work on fish behaviour and how sophisticated it be was done at Wembury by a scientist from the Marine Lab in Plymouth, the MBA, Jeff Potts, and he showed that they the wrasse choose many different types of seaweed, up to about 10 different types of seaweed for different parts of the nest. So they'll use a sort of softer seaweed at the back, perhaps, for the female to lay the eggs in, because it's a male building the nest. And they'll use this crusty seaweed, the pink crusty seaweed, to provide protection on the outside of the nest. And what I only found out recently was that this crusty seaweed, the fragments of crusty weed on the outside, actually still continue to grow after they've been put in place. And as they grow, they knit together, and they knit the outside of the nest together. So I always say, I'm not sure even birds have got that far as to make, you know, have a nest that grows after they've built it. But just want to show you where this particular wrasse was building his nest. It was there, just on that reef. So really is just a short swim from the beach at Wembury at low tide. That was where he did it. But they don't just build them subtidally, they also build nests intertidally. Remember I showed you that picture with the sea snails. And here is one of, there's the Mewstone in the background, and sits Wembury, and here is one of those nests that's been built intertidally. And when they do that, they always build them, because they're going to be exposed to the sun, they always build them facing north, so they don't catch the direct sun. and they construct them so they stay cool in the day and warm at night. That's one thing Jeff showed, that the temperatures stay very similar to sea temperature. And they're quite difficult to make out because that pink weed bleaches in the light, and so they go white, but that's a distinctive cork-wing wrasse nest. Okay, so what happens after the male builds his nest? Hopefully this video will play. This is a male with a nest, again on top of one of the Wembury reefs, and this is a female turning up to lay her eggs. You can see she's a lot more drably coloured than the male, hasn't got his stripes, and she's got what looks like, I don't know if you can see, what looks like something blue hanging down underneath her. That's her egg laying papilla, and it's bright blue, and it's signalling to the male that she's ready to lay eggs. And what I didn't know until I saw this a couple of summers ago was just how brief the egg laying seems to be. This swirling, we presume, is her depositing her eggs. And then the male fertilizes them, and that's it. But there's another twist to this. That female that's just visited the nest may not be a female. It may be a sneaker male pretending to be a female. And this is just a few minutes after that first female. Another female, and it's a different fish, tell from its markings, turns up and does a similar thing. Now, is that another real female and our conscientious nest builders got lucky, or is it a sneaker? Another brief visit, but again, one of the mysteries. And certainly there's some interesting footage on YouTube, I think, of some Norwegian footage showing when a male has detected a sneaker, and he certainly doesn't react like that. So moving on now to our next species. Well, this is a male corkwing again in front of his nest. Most corkwings would choose a really suitable place for a nest, but this one didn't. He built his nest in the backyard of the bolshiest character on the reef, chasing him off there. Hopefully, are these videos playing, Johnny? Can you see them? Yeah. And so who chased him off? Well, that was Brett the Tompot Blenny. Fine figure of a Tompot Blenny. This is, just for those who aren't familiar, the Tompot Blennies are similar to the shanny, the very common blenny in rock pools. Tompot Blennies, typically, you can find them at the bottom of the shore, but they generally live just slightly below the shore in crevices and so on. And just to show you, Brett's a very distinctive blenny, and he's very stroppy. Doesn't just chase off cork-wing wrasse. He tries to chase off me and my camera. This is him doing his display. He's right up against the dome port of the camera, picking up bits of seaweed and spitting them out, as though to say, off you go with that camera. Now, in case you think it's fanciful, talking about individuals, what's amazing about these blennies is that because of the patterns on their skin, these are all, as say, Wembury Bay blennies again. I've just picked out a particular pattern underneath the eye. That's one of the best patterns for identifying individuals, that it depends what angle they present in the crevice to you. So typically in our blenny catalogue, we've got pictures from the front and each side, but you can see just from that photo the patch underneath the eye, very distinctive, very easy to recognise blennies. And they are all males. And just a bit of blenny basic here. The male blennies like that have a crevice territory, and there they invite females in to come in and lay their eggs. The females just lay eggs and then disappear. But the male stays to guard the eggs in that territory. And until this study really, where individual blennies, lots of things weren't known about Tompot blenny sort of life cycle, whether they kept the same territory year on year. They do. They keep them for several years. And it wasn't known that there were Tompot blenny sneakers, which there are. They blennies that young male blennies pretend to be females. and sneak in the nests when there's a female there, a real female, and try to steal some fertilizations. But I won't talk about the sort of overall blenny study tonight. What I'll just do is talk about a particular spot on a Wembury Bay reef. And it's actually the spot very close to where I showed you that corkwing wrasse was building its nest. And the thing about that spot is because it was so close to the beach, I could snorkel, walk down to the beach from home and snorkel there this year. So I could keep an eye on it for a lot of the time while the travel restrictions and so on were on, because I couldn't dive. And some very unusual goings on in this one spot there. And you can see this is the sort of succession. So 2016, I knew there was a male tompot in this particular one crevice. And then Plato occupied it. And you can see this is typical. In case you're wondering why it's called Plato, he wasn't a philosopher as far as I know, but the crevice looks like there's a sort of plate-shaped rock making up the crevice. And you can see, as is typical, he occupied it through 2017, 2018, 2019. So 3 breeding seasons on the trot. And he stayed there in the winters, which is really impressive given how shallow this reef is. It's about 20, 30 centimeters under the water at very low tides on the, southwest facing reef. So imagine what the swell is like, well, at times like this. So he stayed there. But then this year, he turned up very badly injured around the mouth, which is typical from fighting injuries. So no great surprise, but he stayed, seemed to be guarding eggs. And then another blenny I'll talk about in a minute, Clifford, turned up also injured and occupied the crevice. So this was very unusual. First I ever known a blenny to lose his territory sort of in the middle of a breeding season. He lost it to another male who seemed to have sort of taken up residence, but then he disappeared as well. And a mystery blenny appeared just for a couple of days at the end of May, which was quite a shock to have that sort of succession. And then he disappeared as well. And Quaid turned up, quite a distinguished looking chap with long tentacles. And in case you're wondering why it's called Quaid, it's because he was the fourth. That apparently is a boy's name that means fourth. And but so unusual to have 4 male blennies occupying a crevice in one year. But Quaid was successful, had female visitors and eggs, but then he's now gone. And the crevice, as of a couple of weeks ago, when I went to see it, is empty, and it's been empty since mid-August. And that is also so unusual for a blenny crevice to be empty. Now, why is that? And some of the suspects, you sometimes see, this is the plate-like crevice saying about, and you can actually see one of the residents there, can't remember which one it is, in the summer. Was it one of these big spider crabs that you see ambling around that sort of disturbed the crevice, made it uninhabitable? No, don't think so, because I've seen blennies since then. Was it the sea scorpion? The one with the strange eyes was actually about 20 centimeters away from the crevice. Did it snaffle the blenny? Although it would have had a job with an adult male blenny, even the largest sea scorpion taking an adult blenny, though I'm sure. So I saw only the other day a sea scorpion trying to catch young blennies. So, but no, I've seen blennies there since then. But I think the suspect is actually one of these crabs. He's quite a Wembury speciality as well, Montague's crabs, and they are very strong. And I can just about see in the very back of the crevice, there is now a Montague's crab living there, and they could wedge themselves so tightly in that I think perhaps he's made the crevice sort of undesirable now for blennies to occupy. But certainly a crab like a velvet swing crab, a tompot blenny will shift. People tend to think of velvet swing crabs as being very feisty and aggressive until you see a tompot blenny coat with one, and then you realise that they're sort of only second best. But anyway, so that's what seems to have happened there. But just mention what happened nearby. Leo just got on with being a male tompot he lives in a crevice about 2 meters away from that plate where all that was going on. And you can see he was doing his thing. Early in the year, he had a clean floor ready for females to lay eggs. Here he had 2 female visitors come to lay their eggs, and here he is guarding the crevice. But he had problems as well. He had rising sand levels. So of course we're familiar, we see sand disappearing off the beach, coming and going. And of course that sand goes somewhere, and where it seems to go is around the bottom of the reefs just off the beach. So you see Leo had a lovely clean floor at the start of the year with eggs attached, but then sand engulfed the crevice, and presumably he lost the eggs that were on the floor, but kept the eggs on the ceiling, and that's why he stayed there to guard the eggs that were laid on the ceiling of the crevice. And just to give you an idea of how much the sand moves, this photograph was taken later on in, I think around the end of August, after we'd had those storms in August, and the sand level had dropped from where you can see there, right up the hole. This is Leo's hole. It had dropped all the way down below here. So it's dropped about a foot below the level of the reef. So that makes a big difference if you're trying to keep a territory at the bottom of the reef. And he also had the odd visitor as well, say a large conger coming by as well. So, and that gives rise to Leo's name. It's a boy's name that means brave. Anyway, but I also just wanted to show you this clip, which was something very strange I saw, which was a blenny visiting a young conger. This was taken much later in the summer when I could dive. I can assure you I didn't take this snorkeling, but this is a blenny going to investigate a young conger, which I was astonished by. This conger is very small. I think he would have a heck of a job taking that blenny, but it was still very surprising to see the blenny actually approaching the conger. Did that play okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Oh, I thought I'd mention this. Well, one thing I was surprised to see on a dusk snorkel, talking of sort of fish with risky behaviour, this very near where I saw the large conger was this corkwing wrasse asleep. You quite often, this was something we saw on the night rock pool, was corkwing wrasse asleep in sort of very tightly in a bunch of seaweed, but this one was just sleeping out in the open among the stones, right where I'd seen a large conger fairly near. So it's risky. But just back to blennies, something else I was able to do. Again, I was actually looking at more old photographs because I wasn't able to dive over the summer, or part of the spring anyway, and looked back and found Clifford, who occupied one of the other reef crevices near Leo and the Plato succession. And I could trace him way back to when he was a new settler in 2015, and through his prime, 2018, when he had territory, and then a rather battered old gent in 2020 when he briefly took over from Plato. But this crevice where he was is one of the ones that engulfed by sand. So I think my assumption is that why there was so much turmoil on the reef this summer was that the sand level was fluctuating, making the crevices at the bottom of the reef uninhabitable, and then creating this housing crisis, which was leading to a lot of disputes. Anyway, that was my theory. But blennies aren't the only sort of long-lived animals on the reef. That something else I found from going through old photographs was that this beautiful ballan wrasse that sometimes comes and takes a look at me on one of the reefs, you can tell from the markings on his scales, and it probably is a his, that it's the same individual from 2020 back to 2014, back to 2012. So it's the same fish patrolling the same bit of reef, which I think is great to see. And ballan wrasse can live for 30 years, so it's really no surprise, but it's still great to see, because people often think of fish as quite sort of transitory animals, but of course they have territories. And the wrasse are amazing. We have different species as well as the corkwings. I showed you nest building earlier. You know, we have the large ballan wrasse and the smaller rock cooks that engage in this very unusual feeding behaviour with ballan wrasse. They follow them around, seem to benefit from food that those wrasse disturb, and also the larger ballan wrasse seem to deliberately feed the smaller rockhooks by picking up pieces of seaweed off the seabed, spitting them out, and the small fish come in and feed on the small shrimps and so on that are disturbed. And why is the ballan wrasse doing that? Well, presumably it's so they keep the group of rockhooks around them, possibly to act as sentinels against predators, but also as cleaners, because of course the other thing about wrasse is that they're cleaner fish. Usually in the wild, what you see is the rockhooks cleaning the ballan wrasse. And I will just mention one worry we do have in Wembury Bay is that, of course, you probably know that some of our wrasse end up with a one-way ticket to Scottish salmon farms, because there is potting for the wrasse fishery, sadly, in Wembury Bay, although IFCA have put limits on and restrictions on, but of course we'd rather not see any at all. And I should say that there aren't restrictions in Scotland on the wrasse fishery, which is why they've fished them out in some areas and are coming here. And this is a wrasse pot in Wembury Bay. This is the slits which accept the wrasse. And a couple of our particular concerns about it are bycatch. They should put back any other fish that are caught, like sea scorpions and blennies you see in the pots. But of course, if they're in there, if the fish are in there for a couple of days or even several hours, they will lose their nests and so on, and territories. And the other thing that that divers and snorkelers have been seeing, I know, is a lot more infestation with sea lice, whether that on young corkwing wrasse and so on, whether that's something to do with the removal of some of the key cleaners. Okay, but to end on a more cheerful note, and I thought I'd end the talk with coral, one of coral's favourite animals, and that's the spiny starfish, beautiful animal, and of course just different. And it's so like a lot of marine animals that don't have the territories and the sort of guarding a few young. They are broadcast spawners. Oh, just thought I'd show you this picture, very unusual one with 7 arms. This is almost certainly from over-enthusiastic repair. If a starfish loses an arm, it can repair itself. Even half a starfish can grow a whole starfish. And I think this one's been a bit over-enthusiastic and produced 7 arms. But as I say, they are broadcast spawners. And in the summer, you can get these wonderful sights of them crawling up onto the kelp and releasing eggs and sperm into the seawater. And the eggs will probably carry a chemical that gets the other starfish in the area spawning. So you can see behind this one in the background is another starfish waiting to coming up to spawn. And there it is, one of these beautiful spiny starfish. So thank you very much. It's I do find it difficult waffling on when I can't see everyone, but hopefully everyone's found something there that's perhaps piqued their interest. I'm just going to end the talk now with just leave up a few things to make you aware of. Joint venture between Wembury Marine Centre and the Wembury Advisory Group is this code of conduct. I think a lot of you will have had that through the various mailing lists, and something we're keen to get sort of views on that. The very most important of all probably is that the campaign for highly protected marine areas goes on, and the wildlife trusts are doing a lot in that area. Just make you aware of the Benny the Blenny's children's book. It's a sort of great resource for children in the area, interested in the marine life and so on. And this just come out, I think a lot of you will have seen, but please have a look at the new film that we've done for the Wembury Marine Centre and Devon Wildlife Trust, sponsored by South West Water, and you can see that on the Wembury Marine Centre YouTube channel. That's a sort of 13-minute film showing a lot of the behaviours and so on I've talked about, with less jerky video hopefully. And also, if people are interested, I do a daily Instagram on marine life. It's all about UK marine life. It's not all Wembury, but Wembury does play quite a starring role in it. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think you've put a big warm smile on 70 odd people's faces. That was a fascinating talk, and your images are just amazing. And thanks for finishing with one of my favourites, the spiny starfish. We've got a few questions coming in already, so I'm just going to start to read them out from top to bottom. So if you've got questions, please just type them into me and I'll read them out to Paul now. And if anyone wants to turn their videos back on for any reason now, you can, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so first up from DD, she'd like to know if mussels and barnacles have any defences against the dog whelk, or do they just have to pray they don't come across one?
Ah, that is a really good question, because I'm not sure if barnacles can do much, though some species of barnacles are more resistant to dog whelk predation than others, which I think might be part of the difference between what Scottish dog whelks feed on and what ours do down here. But mussels definitely do something. When they sense that a dog whelk is in the area and doing drilling, they throw out lots of the byssus threads, you know, the threads that anchor them to the rocks, and that is the, you know, beard when you eat mussels. They throw out lots of those threads and they stick to the dog whelks, and when the threads tighten, they'll turn the dog whelk over, and the dog whelk will then starve to death, turned over. And when I heard about this, I went sort of looking around mussel beds looking for turned over dog whelks, and I eventually found, but in all the years I've been looking, I've only found one or two, because there's natural selection going on, and dog whelks will generally only prey on mussels around the edge of mussel beds, because the dog whelks that are sort of go into the middle of the mussel bed get weeded out. So there's this arms race. But yeah, amazing.
Thank you, Paul. Next up from Sue. Sue says your photos are fantastic! ! Which setup do you use?
Thank you, Sue. A mixture of setups. Quite a few of the ones I showed tonight that were from snorkeling, like the blennies, were actually taken with one of the Olympus Tufts, compact Tufts, and a small video light, so didn't need a housing. The videos, I don't know if you noticed on the cuttlefish video, if you could see the focus on that was very wobbly. That was taken with a Nikon SLR, which doesn't do video that well. The better videos of the wrasse and so on were taken with a Sony mirrorless camera, which is I find very good for video. And the stills were with a mixture of a Nikon SLR, the Sony mirrorless, and and both in housings, obviously, and the little Olympus amphibious compact, and a mixture of flash and video light and available light.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, another one from DD. Really good question, this one. Do the horns or the head tentacles on the tompot blennies have sensory organs?
Yeah, another great question. Yes, apparently they do. Apparently they have some sort of chemical sensory function. But from what I can gather, the major function of them is in display and showing off. And something I'm trying to study that fascinate. Just give a name check to someone called Louise Hammond at Cornwall College. She did a uni project looking at, on the sort of back catalogue of my photos, looking at male and female head tentacles, and she showed that male head tentacles are significantly longer than females. So you might think there's some sort of display function, and they've shown in other blenny species. But what is fascinating is the difference in location, that some other south coast locations have the male blennies have huge head tentacles compared to the Wembury and Devon ones, particularly, believe it or not, the Brighton ones. You talk about people in Brighton being flamboyant, and that includes the tompot blennies. But whether it's a visibility thing that that as you get poorer visibility, they need bigger tentacles to display. But I suspect it might be a density thing, that where the populations are very dense, there's this incredible local competition, which prompts the bigger head tentacles. But yeah, you can see just there's so much more to learn about all these animals.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, Ruth asks, what can we do to help conserve this amazing place?
Yeah, good question. I think, well, one of the things we can do is, you know, support this campaign for highly protected areas, because as we've seen, a lot of the protected areas so far are quite limited in what they stop and what they protect. And what we need is some genuine sort of no-take, fully protected areas. And a lot of people proposing that Wembury be one of them. So that's something, that campaign. Obviously, everything we can do to reduce waste and recycle and so on is good. But also, I think anything to support sustainable seafood. Make sure that if we buy seafood, we only choose sustainable stuff, because still, despite all of, I think, the impacts of plastics, which we hear about, which is serious in pollution, still the biggest impact on our marine life has been sort of historical and continuing overfishing. So the more we can do to encourage only sustainable fishing, I think that, well, for my mind, that would be one of the biggest single things we can do. I don't know if Coral, you've got any thoughts on.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I've sent out the link to the HPMA campaign, so you can sign the campaign to ask the government to designate these highly protected marine areas. And you know, everything that Paul said is brilliant, and I know lots of us in this talk are doing lots of great things. And just to emphasize this code of conduct, which we're about to release, which is it's voluntary, but that, you know, Wembury is one of the most highly protected areas that we have in the country already, because it's such a special place, but it has a huge amount of pressure on it, especially in the summer months, with visitors, with recreation, with fishing. So this is, you know, this code of conduct is a really good way for all of us as a local community to really try and help protect it. And it was designated as a voluntary marine conservation area in 1981. You know, which just shows how valuable it is. But you know, there's lots of impacts on it. So, you know, spread the message about, you know, protecting the fragile marine habitat and all doing our bit to look after it, really. Okay, we've got loads of questions, Paul, so I'm just going to rattle through them if that's okay.
Yes, I'll try to be quicker. Yeah.
Joe asks, how do fish look after their eggs when the tide drops and they're exposed, like in the photo? So I think he was referring to the corkwing wrasse eggs. So when the tide drops lower, how do they look after them, or how do they survive?
Good question. I'm sure they just, well, the wrasse will go off with the tide, and then it will come back at high tide, and it'll do its nest repairs and remove any predators. But presumably, you know, it's a different strategy, and it effectively, evolution has weighed up the risk of, you know, it sites the intertidal nest very carefully so it doesn't dry out, and it's well built to keep the moisture around the eggs. So presumably the sort of risk from dehydration is less than the risk of aquatic predators like crabs and so on. So for those wrasse, it's the best thing to do.
Thank you. He also asks, any tips for nighttime rock pooling? We're doing one on Monday. My advice would just be to be really safe, make sure you're going out at low tide, have torches, mobile phones, high vis gear, and be really careful where you're walking. When we did our nighttime rock pooling last year for the BioBlitz, there were shore crabs all over the place, which was amazing because they never normally come out of the rock pools, but they were all over the rocks, weren't they, Paul? And he showed his pictures of the sleeping wrasse. So just be even more you know, gentle and delicate than you would normally. I don't know if you want to add to that, Paul.
Yeah, no, and make sure, perhaps, just in case your phone doesn't work on the bit that someone knows where you're going, in case you got stranded or anything. And as Coral says, be careful where you walk from the animal's point of view, but also your own, because the rocks are slippery, you know, in the day. At night, they're likely to be damper, and you can't see where you're going, so it's really easy to slip. Just, yeah, be very careful.
Thank you. Okay, next up from Emma. She says, love this talk, fantastic. I'm an avid local scuba diver and snorkeler, and I'm wondering if Paul ever does any guided snorkel or scuba tours. Would love to get an expert's guide to the incredible bay.
Right, I sometimes join the Wembury Marine Centre snorkel safaris. So, and hopefully I'll do that more with more time. So I think that would be the way, Coral, to do that.
Yeah, so we run snorkel safaris usually throughout the summer. Obviously not this year. We're hopeful that we can run them again next year. They're for welcome for all ages, 8+, but we do normally try to do an adults only one, which Paul has very kindly come along to over the past few years. So just look out on our Facebook page and our website in the springtime, and all of our events will be on there. Question from Phil, any issues with invasive species?
Good question. Yes, we do have an issue with the Pacific oysters. You'll see as an invasive species, and interestingly, I didn't have time to put it, but there a new blenny appeared on the reef last year, 2019, the variable blenny, and there's quite a thrive that's mainly sort of from Spain and that area, and there's a thriving population in Plymouth Sound. And it was my son Sam who saw the first one in Wembury. I've been looking out for them this year, haven't seen them, but we assume that's a sort of warm water induced change. And interesting to see if they compete with the tompots. But I haven't, as I say, haven't seen any this year. But doing a lot more snorkeling, they're much more difficult to spot. I think you'd be more likely to see them scuba diving.
Thanks.
But yes, there are. And there's a seaweed one, Coral. Do you want to say about?
Yeah, I was just going to add. There's quite a few seaweed ones now actually, and quite a few other invasive species. So Wembury is quite heavily impacted by a few invasive seaweeds, which can sort of take over the rock pools and outcompete other species. And there are other invasive species as well that we look out for. And we do try to do surveys to record invasive species, which feed into national databases. So. Yeah, invasive species will certainly continue to be on the rise, so we have to keep an eye on them. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, then do get in touch. Okay, next one I think is from Matt Chown, but I'm not sure because it's coming up as letters and numbers. But it says, great talk, Paul, thank you. In your view, what are the fors and against of Wembury being a HPMA? So I think you've probably covered the fors. You see any disadvantages?
I mean, from my point of view, I don't see many disadvantages at all. I think it'd be a good thing. I know some have concerns that highly protected marine areas should be, because they're also used to study sort of no impact, that they're better in low impact areas. But I think, you know, there are much lower impact areas within Wembury Marine Conservation Area anyway. So, you know, I think for me, the more protection, the better. And although, you know, historically there's been a feeling that the fishing industry would fight, and they probably still will to some extent fight protection. But the point about protecting areas is that where they've tried them, you get enormous spillover effects, you know, where you get thriving populations of marine life. It benefits fishing in areas around those areas. So it really is a win-win. You just have to take a sort of a long view.
Thank you. Okay, Anna asks, is there any noticeable increase or decrease in any particular animal over recent years?
Ooh, good. It's interesting. I mean, there's animals like the variable blenny, that on the increase. I'm trying to think if I've seen. I mean, I find it quite difficult from when I give a personal view, because when it's just me looking, it tends to be what I look for. And that's why, just a plug for schemes like Sea Search for divers and the different shore recording systems are so important, because they give a sort of general view, where when it's just me noticing them, it can just be my personal bias. I mean, like, because I've suddenly got more interested in dog whelks, I sort of went on the beach last couple of days and I've just seen so many dog whelks, but I don't think there are more of them. It's just that I'm noticing them far more. So, you know, if you're interested in things like that, please get involved with things like Sea Search and the shore-based equivalents.
Yeah, and from our point of view, with our rock pools, we've noticed a huge increase in a type of crab called a Montague's crab, which has become really, really common over the last few years, along with the invasive seaweeds, which I mentioned as well. Okay, Benjamin's also asked about your equipment that you use, which I think you said it's already been answered. Lottie would like to ask if marine biology is a good area to go into to study, and would you suggest it?
Oh, yes, it's one. Well, it's wonderful, marine biology, but it is very competitive. There are, a lot of people students, I think, will tell you there's a lot of people interested in marine biology, and relatively few jobs. But I think, as with anything, the thing is to keep, if you study marine biology, is keep flexibility, keep it as broad as possible, and develop skills and techniques that are applicable, whether they be, computing or some sort of biochemical analysis, that you might be a marine biologist, but you're expert in other things that you can apply to marine biology if you're lucky to get a marine biology job, but you can also apply them in other areas until you're lucky enough to get a marine job. So that's very general message, but I'd always say that to people looking at studying it.
Okay, Paul, are you okay for another few minutes? We've still got
I'm
15 odd questions to get through. Okay, Kathy would like to know, given that land species show migratory patterns according to the seasons, is there a similar effect for marine animals?
Yes, there are some that do move around. Certainly some of the sharks move big distances. Some of the seal work, tagging shows seals doing amazing movements, and even flatfish apparently do this amazing tidal thing, where they go with the tide and then they rest on the bottom while the tide's against them, go back with the tide. So yes, animals that swim do migrate, and also adults migrate, but the whole issue of larvae, and I'm not an expert, but if you hear someone like Keith Hiscock talk about larval recruitment, larvae, the planktonic larvae of different animals can survive. Their survival is very variable. Some spend weeks and weeks in the plankton and can survive, so they can go great distances. Others can't survive for very long or at different temperatures, so they can only hop, and that gives rise to some of the odd effects when an animal is wiped out through a pollution event like the Torrey Canyon or something like that. Some animals come back very quickly, others take decades to recover, like the crawfish, for example, and that's all to do with how long their larvae can survive and so on. So, sorry, another very waffly answer.
Okay, this one's from Elle, aged 9. We love the photos. Have you ever seen a basking shark in Wembury Bay?
No, I haven't. But I have heard there was one. I love this story. I'll just tell this story in near the Mewstone. And the story is that a kayaker saw a basking shark out by the Mewstone. And I think most people who sort of live on the coast know about basking sharks and know they just feed on plankton. But apparently this person didn't. So she just looked out of her kayak and saw this enormous shark, bigger than her kayak, and apparently ran up the beach in some distress, was the quote from this news article, because she didn't realise it was just a plankton eating shark. So anyway.
I have it on very good authority that there was a basking shark in Wembury Bay during lockdown.
Oh really?
My partner was very lucky to see it.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
I was in a meeting at the time and I couldn't escape.
I remember that now.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, no, I'd forgotten that. Yeah. Thanks,
okay. From Benjamin. Hi Paul, regarding the shell shape of the dog whelks and other gastropods, I'm currently studying shell shape and wave exposure within the Patella vulgata species of limpet. Have you seen any specific change in shell shape with wave exposure, a sheltered versus exposed site?
No, I haven't. I'm not a big limpet expert at all. I mean, presumably you're plugged into some of the limpet research. There's I think there was a conference recently at the MBA totally about limpets. So there's a lot of, and Steve Hawkins. So I don't know how familiar you are, but I don't know much about limpets, but there is a lot of really good limpet research around. So, you know, the MBA would be a start.
Okay, B Johnson would like to know where is best to go for snorkeling around Wembury, to the left or the right when approaching the beach? And is it good to go in winter time?
Good question. I think it just depends where on the beach is good. Depends on, you know, where the swell is coming in from. Really, what you want is calm, and I think and pick the best conditions. You do see people, including me, I know, sometimes trying to snorkel when it's too rough or too rough for it to be good, and they get put off. That's the most important thing, to go when it's calm. And that's the worst thing about the winter, not so much the cold, you know, if you've got a good wetsuit, but you know, it tends to get rough and stay swelly. If it's calm and you can get in close to the rocks without getting bashed against them, you know, any side is good.
Okay, thanks. Couple of similar questions from Ruth and Chris, asking about sort of pollution in the Yelm, whether you know about it, you know, anything specific, whether it affects the marine conservation area, and what people should do if they spot pollution.
Certainly deal with the easy one first. If people spot pollution, ring the Environment Agency hotline, which I believe is at 0800 80 70 60, but check that. But they are certainly the people to report pollution events to, whether they be water industry or, you know, or more disperse. Certainly, I mean, I think that the impact on the Yelm, the biggest impact is from land drainage, and a worry is from, you know, agricultural runoff. But I think recently there's been a worry that some of the big construction projects like Sherford have, you know, there should be all sorts of conditions in place to stop a lot of that drainage going into the Yelm, but there is a concern there. But if you spot anything that you're worried about, as I say, ring the Environment Agency, and they are good at investigating whenever they can and feeding back as well to you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Elsa would like to know, how can starfish go side to side?
How can starfish
go side to side? So how can they move?
Oh, they walk on their tube feet. They're underneath the starfish. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny tube feet, and they move by hydraulics and a mixture of hydraulics and muscles. They have this hydraulic system, a bit like the braking system in a car, where they push fluid down the little tube feet, and they act like miniature legs, and they walk the starfish around. And most starfish have suckers on the end of the tube feet that they can cling onto the rocks with, and also pull open their prey like mussels. And some sand-dwelling starfish have running spikes instead of suckers, so they can move quickly over the sand.
Okay, thank you. So Ruth has asked how she could become a volunteer. Ruth, please get in touch with us after the talk, wemburymarinecentre.org, and I can give you more information about that. That would be great. We'd love to have any volunteers for both the environment group or the marine centre. So if you're interested, please get in touch with us afterwards. That would be fab. Johnny asks, it was difficult to get a sense of scale, but how big is a blenny?
Yeah, good question. And that often comes up on photos, actually. One of the disadvantages of a Zoom call, people can't just so very easily and say, how big was that? Most of those male, sort of big male tompot blennies are about 15 to 20 centimetres long. You know, fully grown, a tompot blenny can reach apparently 30 centimetres, but I mean, that's massive. Normally the males are, big males, about 15, 20. And most of the ones you see are smaller than that. Brilliant,
thank you. Tony Stacey says, great talk. Are there any seagrass beds around Wembury?
Yes, there are. There's one over at the entrance to the Yelm off Sellers Beach. And if you, you can snorkel out from Sellers Beach, and there's some lovely seagrass there. So obviously one of the things we want to encourage there is people to, you know, not anchor in the seagrass and not damage it and so on. That's a concern because a lot of yachties use that area to anchor because it's a nice sheltered spot. But the worry is that, you know, anchors can drag up the seagrass. But it's a lovely seagrass bed.
Brilliant. Okay, I think that's it for all the questions. Unless, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question with the video? Everyone, I think we've read all the questions in the chat. There have been lots of thank yous for a brilliant talk, Paul. People have enjoyed it and learned something new. So
amazing. Thank you so very much. This was so informative and educational. I've really enjoyed it.